My name is Estelle Hayes, and I'm 69 years old. Yesterday evening, my husband Lawrence looked me directly in the eyes and said, "You're a worthless old woman. You've never contributed anything to this marriage. You're just dead weight I've been carrying for 50 years." His words hit me like a physical blow. We were standing in our kitchen, the kitchen of the house I'd maintained for 5 decades, where I'd cooked thousands of meals, raised our children, created a home. "Lawrence, how can you say that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I've been your wife for 50 years. I raised our children. I managed our household." "Managed our household?" Lawrence interrupted with a cruel laugh. "You mean you sat around the house spending my money while I worked? That's not contribution. That's freeloading." "I worked too," I protested. "I worked part-time for 20 years while raising the kids." "Part-time jobs don't count," Lawrence dismissed. "Secretary work, retail, nothing important. Nothing that actually supported this family. I supported this family, my career, my income. Everything we have is because of me." I stood there, stunned, as my husband of 50 years reduced my entire life to nothing important. "Why are you saying this?" I asked, tears forming. "What brought this on?" "Because I'm tired of pretending," Lawrence said coldly. "I'm 71 years old. I've spent 50 years married to someone who contributed nothing, and I'm done." "Done," I repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means I want a divorce," Lawrence announced. "I want to spend whatever years I have left actually enjoying my life, not supporting a worthless old woman who never earned her keep." The next morning, I proved Lawrence wrong in a way he never expected. A way that would expose 50 years of lies, reveal truths he desperately tried to hide, and ultimately destroy the comfortable retirement he thought he'd secured. But to understand how I proved my worthless husband wrong, I need to take you back to the beginning. I married Lawrence Hayes in 1975 when I was 19 years old. He was 21, fresh out of college with a business degree, confident and ambitious. "I'm going to build something big," Lawrence told me on our wedding day, "and I want you by my side." "I'll always be by your side," I promised. For the first few years of our marriage, we were partners. Lawrence started his career in sales while I worked as a secretary at a law firm. We pooled our incomes, saved carefully, and dreamed of our future. When I got pregnant with our first child at 23, Lawrence and I discussed our options. "I think I should quit work and stay home with the baby," I suggested. "Daycare costs almost as much as I make. It doesn't make financial sense." "Are you sure?" Lawrence asked. "I like that we both work. It feels equal." "We'll still be equal," I assured him. "Just in different ways. You'll earn the income. I'll manage the home and raise our child. We're both contributing." "Okay," Lawrence agreed, "if that's what you want." So I quit my job and became a stay-at-home mother. That decision would define the next 50 years of my life. For the first 10 years of our marriage, Lawrence treated me as a partner. When he came home from work, he'd ask about my day. He'd help with the children. We had 3 by the time I was 30. He'd acknowledge the work I did managing the household. "I couldn't do what I do without you taking care of everything here," Lawrence would say. "You make my career possible." I felt valued, appreciated, like we were a team. But slowly, things changed. Around year 15 of our marriage, when I was 34, Lawrence got a major promotion. He became regional sales manager, nearly doubling his income. Suddenly, Lawrence started viewing our marriage differently. "I made $150,000 this year," Lawrence announced proudly. "That's more than both our parents made in their entire lives combined." "That's wonderful," I said. "We've worked so hard for this." "I've worked hard," Lawrence corrected. "I'm the one who earned this promotion." "We both worked hard," I said. "I've been supporting your career by managing everything at home." "Supporting," Lawrence laughed. "Estelle, you stay home with the kids. That's not work. That's just being a mom." "Being a mom is work," I insisted. "And managing a household, cooking, cleaning, organizing everything." "It's not the same as real work," Lawrence interrupted. "Real work happens outside the home. Real work generates income. What you do is..." Nice, but it's not work. That conversation was the first time Lawrence explicitly devalued what I contributed to our marriage. It wouldn't be the last. By year 25 of our marriage, when I was 44 and our youngest child was graduating high school, Lawrence had completely rewritten our marriage history. Estelle, the kids are all grown now, Lawrence said. Don't you think you should get a job? I've been thinking about it, I admitted. I've been home for 20 years. It might be nice to work again. It would be nice for you to finally contribute financially, Lawrence said. Finally contribute, I repeated, hurt. Lawrence, I've been contributing for 25 years by raising our children and managing our home. That's not financial contribution, Lawrence dismissed. That's just doing what wives are supposed to do. I'm talking about actually earning money, actually pulling your weight. I have pulled my weight, I protested. Just because my work didn't generate income doesn't mean. If it doesn't generate income, it's not real work, Lawrence said firmly. That's just reality, Estelle. I got a part-time job at a department store. I worked 20 hours a week for $12 an hour, earning about $1,000 a month. Lawrence made $200,000 a year by then. My $12,000 annual income was 6% of our household income. But at least I was contributing in a way Lawrence recognized. By year 35 of our marriage, when I was 54, Lawrence's contempt for me had become obvious. Estelle, can you keep the noise down? Lawrence would snap when I was cooking dinner. I'm trying to work. Sorry, I'd apologize, even though cooking inherently involves noise. And could you make sure my shirts are ironed properly? Lawrence would criticize. This one has wrinkles. I ironed it yesterday, I defend. Well, do it again, Lawrence would demand. When I'm at important business meetings, I need to look professional. The least you can do is iron my shirts correctly. The least I can do. As if decades of managing his household, raising his children, and supporting his career were the least. 5 years ago, when Lawrence turned 66, he retired from his career. I've worked for 45 years, Lawrence announced. I've earned my retirement. Now I can finally relax and enjoy life. That sounds wonderful, I said. We can enjoy retirement together. Wait. Lawrence laughed. Estelle, you didn't work. You can't retire from something you never did. I worked for 45 years too, I pointed out. Just not in an office. Right, Lawrence said dismissively. You stayed home and did housework. That's not a career to retire from. But Lawrence's retirement changed our dynamic even more. Now Lawrence was home all day, every day, and he had opinions about everything I did. Why are you vacuuming at 10 a.m.? Lawrence would complain. That's too early, it's disruptive. When should I vacuum? I'd ask. I don't know, later, when I'm not trying to read, Lawrence would say. Estelle, this dinner is too salty, Lawrence would criticize. Estelle, you're watching too much TV. Don't you have something productive to do? Estelle, why did you buy this brand of coffee? I prefer the other brand. Every day, constant criticism. Constant reminders that I wasn't doing enough, wasn't good enough, wasn't contributing enough. Yesterday evening, everything came to a head. I'd spent the afternoon cleaning the house. At 69, cleaning is harder than it used to be. My back aches, my knees hurt. But I'd scrubbed bathrooms, vacuumed carpets, dusted furniture, done laundry, and prepared dinner. When Lawrence came in from his golf game, he looked around the living room and said, Did you even clean today? The house looks the same as it did this morning. I spent 4 hours cleaning, I said, exhausted. 4 hours to accomplish nothing, Lawrence scoffed. If you had a real job, you'd be fired for that kind of productivity. Lawrence, I'm 69 years old, I said. Cleaning takes longer than it used to. That's because you never had a real work ethic, Lawrence said. You've spent 50 years doing the bare minimum. No wonder you're slow. Something in me snapped. The bare minimum, I repeated, anger rising. Lawrence, I've spent 50 years managing this household, raising our children, supporting your career. Supporting my career, Lawrence laughed cruelly. Estelle, you've never supported anything. You've been a burden I've carried for 50 years. A burden, I said, tears forming. Yes, a burden, Lawrence confirmed. You're a worthless old woman. You've never contributed anything to this marriage. You're just dead weight I've been carrying. How can you say that? I asked, my voice breaking. Because it's true, Lawrence said coldly. And I'm done pretending otherwise. I want a divorce. I want to spend my remaining years free from supporting someone who never earned her keep. I stood there in the kitchen I'd maintained for 50 years, surrounded by the dinner I'd just cooked, in the house I'd cleaned, and heard my husband of 50 years call me worthless. Fine, I said quietly. If you want a divorce, we'll get a divorce. Good, Lawrence said. My lawyer will contact you. Don't expect much in the settlement. You didn't contribute to our assets, so you don't deserve half. He walked away, leaving me standing in the kitchen, crying. But then, through my tears, I remembered something Lawrence had clearly forgotten. Something that would change everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying Lawrence's words. You never contributed anything. You don't deserve half. But legally, in our state, marriage is a partnership. Regardless of who earned income, assets acquired during marriage are considered joint property. Except, there was something Lawrence didn't know. Something I discovered years ago and kept quiet about because I'd trusted him. About 10 years ago, I'd been looking for tax documents in Lawrence's home office. In a locked file cabinet, which I had a key to because I was supposed to have access to our financial records, I'd found documents that didn't make sense. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of. Investment portfolios in Lawrence's name alone. Property deeds for rental properties I didn't know we owned. At the time, I'd confronted Lawrence about it. Lawrence, I found these documents, I'd said. We have accounts and properties I didn't know about. Those are my business investments, Lawrence had said dismissively. Don't worry about them. But shouldn't they be in both our names? I'd asked. We're married. They're in my name because I earned the money that funded them, Lawrence had explained. But don't worry, they're for our retirement, for both of us. Okay, I'd said, trusting him. But now, lying in bed after he'd called me worthless and demanded a divorce, I realized Lawrence hadn't been investing for our retirement. He'd been hiding assets. The next morning, I did something I should have done 10 years ago. I called a lawyer. At 8 a.m., I called attorney Minnie Richardson, a divorce lawyer whose advertisement I'd seen in the local paper. Mrs. Hayes, what can I help you with? Attorney Richardson asked. My husband wants a divorce, I explained, and he told me I don't deserve half our assets because I didn't contribute financially to the marriage. How long have you been married? Attorney Richardson asked. 50 years, I said. And during those 50 years, what did you do? Attorney Richardson asked. I was a stay-at-home mother for most of it, I explained. I raised our 3 children. I managed our household. I worked part-time for about 20 years, but nothing that earned significant income. Mrs. Hayes, in this state, marriage is a legal partnership, Attorney Richardson said firmly. It doesn't matter who earned the income. Assets acquired during marriage are presumed to be marital property, owned equally by both spouses. But Lawrence says because I didn't earn the money, I don't deserve half, I said. Your husband is wrong, Attorney Richardson said. And if he thinks he's going to divorce you without giving you half of everything acquired during your 50-year marriage, he's in for a very rude awakening. There's something else, I said. About 10 years ago, I found documents showing Lawrence has accounts and properties in his name only, investments I didn't know about. He told me they were for our retirement, but now I'm wondering if he was hiding assets. That's called asset concealment, Attorney Richardson said. And if we can prove he intentionally hid assets to avoid sharing them in a potential divorce, the court won't look kindly on that. What should I do? I asked. First, gather every financial document you can find, Attorney Richardson instructed. Bank statements, tax returns, investment records, property deeds, everything. Second, don't tell your husband you've hired a lawyer yet. Let's see what he's hiding before he has a chance to hide it better. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own home. I went through every file in Lawrence's office, every drawer, every cabinet. I photographed documents with my phone. I made lists of accounts, properties, and investments. What I found shocked me. Lawrence had approximately $2.3 million in assets I hadn't known about. 6 rental properties worth about $1.5 million total, owned in his name only. Investment accounts worth about $600,000, in his name only. 2 bank accounts with approximately $200,000 combined, in his name only. All of this separate from our joint assets. Our primary residence worth $450,000. Joint checking and savings with about $80,000. Our joint retirement accounts with about $700,000. Lawrence had told me for 50 years that he was earning $250,000 per year, depending on commissions. We'd lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. Now I understood why. Lawrence had been siphoning money into secret accounts and investments for decades. Our total marital assets weren't the $1.2 million I'd thought. They were $3.5 million. And Lawrence had tried to hide $2.3 million of it. 1 week after Lawrence had called me worthless, I confronted him with what I'd found. "Lawrence, we need to talk," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table with a folder full of documents. "About what?" Lawrence asked dismissively. "About these," I said, spreading out photographs of bank statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios. Lawrence's face went pale. "Where did you get those?" "From your office," I said calmly. "The office in the house I've maintained for 50 years. The file cabinets I've always had keys to because we're supposed to be partners." "Those are my private business documents," Lawrence said angrily. "These documents show you've been hiding millions of dollars in assets from me," I said. "Assets acquired during our marriage using income you earned while I was home raising our children and managing our household." "I earned that money," Lawrence shouted. "I have every right to invest it however I want." "No, you don't," I said firmly. "We're married. In this state, assets acquired during marriage are marital property. You can't just hide millions of dollars because you think I didn't earn them." "You didn't earn them," Lawrence insisted. "You sat at home for 50 years while I worked. That money is mine." "I'm filing for divorce," I announced. "And I'm filing a motion for full financial disclosure. You're going to have to reveal every account, every property, every asset you've hidden, and then we're going to divide them equally." "I'll fight you," Lawrence threatened. "I'll make sure you get nothing." "You can try," I said calmly. "But Lawrence, I have evidence that you've been hiding assets for years. Courts don't like that. In fact, when one spouse hides assets, courts often award the other spouse a larger share as punishment." "You worthless," Lawrence started. "I'm not worthless," I interrupted. "I spent 50 years supporting your career, raising our children, and managing our home. That had value, and the law recognizes that value, even if you don't." The next morning, I filed for divorce, and I proved Lawrence wrong in ways he never imagined. Before I continue, kindly subscribe now. Hit that like button and turn on NOTIFICTONS. Drop a comment. Is Estelle doing the right thing? Should stay-at-home spouses get half in divorce? Where are you watching from? United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Jamaica, Australia? Let me know. 2 weeks after I filed for divorce, I sat in attorney Minnie Richardson's office, reviewing what we'd uncovered about Lawrence's hidden financial empire. "Mrs. Hayes, your husband has been running a sophisticated asset concealment scheme for at least 20 years, Attorney Richardson said, spreading documents across her desk. "And the more we dig, the worse it gets." "What do you mean?" I asked nervously. "I mean your husband didn't just hide a few accounts," Attorney Richardson explained. "He created an entire shadow financial life that you were never meant to discover." She pointed to the documents. "Look at this. 6 rental properties, all purchased during your marriage using income from his job. But he put them in his name only and never told you about the rental income. How much rental income? I asked. Based on tax returns I've subpoenaed, approximately $72,000 per year, Attorney Richardson said. For the past 15 years. That's over $1 million in rental income he never disclosed to you. $1 million, I repeated, stunned. And that's just the rental income, Attorney Richardson continued. Look at these investment accounts. He's been contributing the maximum to retirement accounts in both your names, but he's also been contributing to secret accounts in only his name. Same employer, same paycheck, but split contributions to hide money from you. Can he do that? I asked. Legally, no, Attorney Richardson said firmly. Morally, absolutely not. Mrs. Hayes, your husband has been stealing from your marital partnership for decades. Over the next hour, Attorney Richardson walked me through the complete financial picture. Assets Lawrence disclosed. Primary residence, $450,000, joint. Joint savings and checking, $80,000. Joint retirement accounts, $700,000. Total disclosed, $1,230,000. Assets Lawrence hid. 6 rental properties, $1,500,000. Rental income accumulated over 15 years, $1,080,000. Secret investment accounts, $600,000. Secret bank accounts, $200,000. Business expense account actually personal, $150,000. Total hidden, $3,530,000. Grand total, $4,760,000. Lawrence has been telling you for 50 years that you live comfortably on his $150,000,250,000 income, Attorney Richardson said. But in reality, he's been earning close to $300,000 annually when you include bonuses, commissions, and rental income. He just never told you about half of it. I sat there trying to process this information. For 50 years, I'd trusted Lawrence completely with our finances. He'd handled all the money while I focused on home and children. And he'd used that trust to rob me. What happens now? I asked. Now we go to court, Attorney Richardson said. We're filing a motion for emergency financial disclosure and requesting the judge freeze all assets until the divorce is finalized. We're also filing a motion for sanctions against your husband for asset concealment. Sanctions, I repeated. When one spouse deliberately hides assets in a divorce, courts can punish them, Attorney Richardson explained. Sometimes by awarding the other spouse a larger share of assets, sometimes by ordering them to pay the other spouse's legal fees, sometimes both. Do you think the judge will do that? I asked hopefully. Mrs. Hayes, your husband hid $3.5 million in assets while calling you worthless for not contributing financially, Attorney Richardson said. When the judge sees the evidence, I think your husband is going to very much regret his words and his actions. 1 month after filing for divorce, we had our first court hearing before Judge Thaddeus Brooks. Lawrence arrived with his lawyer, Floyd Turner. Looking confident and dismissive, he clearly thought this would be a simple proceeding where he'd quickly be granted a divorce with minimal financial impact. He was very wrong. Your Honor, we're here on the petitioner's motion for emergency financial disclosure and asset freeze, Attorney Richardson began. Mrs. Hayes discovered that her husband of 50 years has been concealing millions of dollars in assets throughout their marriage. That's absurd, Lawrence's lawyer Floyd Turner interrupted. My client has been completely transparent with his finances. Your Honor, may I present evidence? Attorney Richardson asked. Judge Brooks nodded. Please proceed. Attorney Richardson presented documents systematically. Bank statements showing secret accounts, property deeds for rental properties Lawrence owned alone, tax returns showing rental income Lawrence never disclosed to me, investment portfolios I'd never known about. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes earned approximately $250,000 annually during the peak of his career, Attorney Richardson explained. But he told his wife they were living on $150,000 Where did the difference go? She pointed to the evidence. Into secret accounts, secret properties, secret investments, all acquired during the marriage using marital income but hidden from his wife. Judge Brooks reviewed the documents, his expression growing increasingly stern. Mr. Turner, can you explain why your client has multiple properties and accounts in his name only, acquired during a 50-year marriage? Floyd Turner looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, my client earned the income that purchased these assets. He has the right to invest his earnings. During a marriage, there is no his earnings and her earnings, Judge Brooks interrupted sharply. There are marital earnings, and assets purchased with marital earnings are marital property, regardless of whose name is on the title. But Your Honor, Floyd started. Mr. Turner, did your client disclose these assets to his wife? Judge Brooks asked directly. The properties and accounts are listed on tax returns that both spouses signed, Floyd argued weakly. Did your client specifically disclose to his wife that he owned 6 rental properties generating $72,000 annually? Judge Brooks pressed. Floyd was silent. That's what I thought, Judge Brooks said. Mrs. Richardson, what are you requesting? Emergency asset freeze on all marital property, including the previously concealed assets, Attorney Richardson said. Full financial disclosure from Mr. Hayes under penalty of perjury, and a forensic accounting to determine if there are additional hidden assets. Granted on all counts, Judge Brooks ruled. Mr. Hayes, you are ordered to provide complete financial disclosure within 30 days. All assets, including those previously concealed, are frozen pending final divorce proceedings. And Mr. Hayes, I'm warning you now, if we discover you've hidden anything else, there will be serious consequences. Lawrence's face went pale. This wasn't going the way he'd expected. After the hearing, Lawrence cornered me in the courthouse hallway. Are you happy now? Lawrence hissed. You're going to destroy me financially over this. I'm not destroying you, I said calmly. I'm claiming what's legally mine, half of what we built together over 50 years. We didn't build anything, Lawrence shouted. I built it with my work, my career, my investments. Your investments funded by income you earned while I was home raising our children, I corrected. Income you couldn't have earned if I hadn't been managing everything else. You managed a house, Lawrence scoffed. That's not the same as building a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio. Legally, it is, I said. The court just told you that. I should have divorced you decades ago, Lawrence said bitterly. Before I built all this, then you'd have gotten nothing. But you didn't, I pointed out. You waited until after 50 years of marriage and millions in accumulated assets. That was your choice, Lawrence. You're going to regret this, Lawrence threatened. I'll fight you on every penny. You're welcome to try, I said. But every dollar you spend fighting me is a dollar we could have split amicably. Your choice. As ordered by the court, a forensic accountant named Dr. Opal Martinez was appointed to examine our complete financial history. Dr. Martinez spent 6 weeks reviewing 50 years of tax returns, bank statements, property records, investment accounts, and business expenses. What she found was even worse than we'd initially discovered. Dr. Martinez called a meeting with both sets of lawyers to present her findings. I've completed my analysis of the Hayes marital finances, Dr. Martinez began, and I've identified several concerning patterns. She displayed a chart on the conference room screen. Mr. Hayes has systematically underreported his income to his wife for approximately 30 years. Starting around 1995, there are significant discrepancies between his actual earnings and what appears on joint tax returns. What kind of discrepancies? Attorney Richardson asked. Mr. Hayes's employer provided documentation showing his compensation history, Dr. Martinez explained. From 1995 to 2020, Mr. Hayes earned approximately $7.2 million in salary, bonuses, and commissions. However, the couple's joint tax returns show combined marital income of only $4.8 million during that same period. Where did the missing $2.4 million go? Attorney Richardson asked. Into accounts and investments in Mr. Hayes's name only, Dr. Martinez said. He was essentially running two parallel financial lives, one that his wife knew about and one that was completely hidden. Floyd Turner, Lawrence's lawyer, tried to object. This is speculation. My client's employer compensation and tax returns match. Actually, they don't, Dr. Martinez interrupted. Mr. Hayes filed married filing jointly tax returns that Mrs. Hayes signed, but he also maintained separate financial records that excluded approximately 35% of his income. He was essentially conducting tax fraud. The room went silent. Are you saying my husband committed tax fraud? I asked, shocked. I'm saying there are serious discrepancies that should be investigated by the IRS, Dr. Martinez said carefully. But that's beyond the scope of my divorce-related analysis. Dr. Martinez continued her presentation, revealing more disturbing findings. I also found evidence of deliberate asset concealment, Dr. Martinez said. For example, in 2010, Mr. Hayes purchased a rental property for $180,000. On the closing documents, he listed himself as unmarried despite being married to Mrs. Hayes for 35 years at that time. He lied on legal documents, I asked. Multiple times, Dr. Martinez confirmed. On at least 4 separate property purchases, Mr. Hayes listed himself as unmarried or single. This was likely done to avoid questions about why his wife wasn't on the deed. That's fraud, Attorney Richardson said. It's certainly misrepresentation, Dr. Martinez agreed. She continued. I also found that Mr. Hayes has been diverting marital assets into accounts for his adult children from this marriage. What, I said confused, are children? Over the past 10 years, Mr. Hayes has transferred approximately $400,000 to accounts nominally owned by your adult children, Dr. Martinez explained. However, the pattern of transactions suggests these accounts are actually controlled by Mr. Hayes and are being used to hide assets from you. He's using our children to help him steal from me, I asked, heartbroken. It appears that way, Dr. Martinez said gently. That evening I called our just family stuff, Geneva said vaguely. Geneva, your father transferred $150,000 to an account in your name over 5 years, Attorney Richardson said. That's not a gift. That's asset concealment. And if you helped him hide assets from your mother, you could be legally liable. We didn't know, Curtis protested. Dad just said he wanted to help us out financially. Did any of you actually receive this money? Attorney Richardson asked. Or do you just have your names on accounts your father controls? Silence. If you cooperate with this investigation and help us recover the concealed assets, you won't face legal consequences, Attorney Richardson said. But if you continue to help your father hide money from your mother, you could be charged as accessories to fraud. Mom, this is crazy, Viola said. You're going to see your own children. I don't want to, I said, my heart breaking. But Viola, your father stole millions of dollars from our marriage, and he involved you 3 in the theft. I need that money back. I'm 69 years old with no career and no income beyond Social Security. That money is my security. You'll get alimony, Geneva said. Alimony might not be enough, Attorney Richardson explained. Especially if your father successfully hides half his assets. Your mother needs her fair share of what was built during 50 years of marriage. We'll talk to Dad, Curtis said finally. See what he wants us to do. No, I said firmly. You'll talk to your own lawyers, because what your father wants you to do might be illegal, and I won't let you go to jail to protect a man who called your mother worthless. 3 days later, all 3 children returned to my lawyer's office with their own attorneys. We've decided to cooperate with the asset recovery, Geneva's lawyer announced. My clients will provide full documentation of all accounts in their names and will facilitate the return of any funds that rightfully belong to Mrs. Hayes. That's the right decision, Attorney Richardson said. Thank you. Over the next week, we recovered $380,000 from accounts in our children's names. The remaining $20,000 had been spent over the years, but at least we'd recovered most of it. When Lawrence found out, he was furious. He called me from his lawyer's office. You turned our children against me. I didn't turn them against you, I said. I protected them from being accessories to your fraud. They should be thanking me. They're never going to forgive you for this, Lawrence said. Then they're more like their father than I thought, I replied. Because you've never forgiven me for 50 years of supporting your career while you built a fortune you tried to hide from me. Before I continue, kindly subscribe now, smash that like button, and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Should the children have protected their father? Is Estelle being too harsh? Where are you watching from? 6 months after I filed for divorce, I sat in a courtroom listening to Lawrence's lawyer argue that I deserved nothing from our 50-year marriage. Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes was a housewife, Floyd Turner argued. She chose not to pursue a career. She chose not to generate income. Those were her choices, and she shouldn't be rewarded for them now. I sat next to Attorney Minnie Richardson, my hands clenched in my lap, listening to my entire life being reduced to choices that supposedly justified giving me nothing. Mr. Hayes, on the other hand, worked tirelessly for 50 years, Floyd continued. He built a successful career. He made wise investments. He created wealth through his own effort and skill. That wealth belongs to him. Judge Thaddeus Brooks listened impassively, occasionally making notes. Mrs. Richardson, your response, Judge Brooks prompted. Attorney Richardson stood. Your Honor, Mr. Turner's argument fundamentally misunderstands marriage law. This isn't about who deserves what based on life choices. This is about legal partnership. When two people marry, they form an economic partnership where both contributions, financial and non-financial, have value. She gestured to me. Mrs. Hayes spent 50 years enabling her husband's career by managing their household and raising their children. Without her contributions, Mr. Hayes couldn't have worked 60-hour weeks, traveled for business, or focused entirely on building his career. She made his success possible. But beyond the legal arguments, Attorney Richardson continued, her voice hardening, we need to address Mr. Hayes's systematic fraud. He didn't just earn money and invest wisely. He hid millions of dollars in assets from his wife. He lied on legal documents. He enlisted their children in asset concealment. He committed what may constitute tax fraud. Floyd Turner tried to interrupt, but Judge Brooks held up his hand. I want to hear this, Judge Brooks said. Continue, Mrs. Richardson. For the next 2 hours, Attorney Richardson methodically presented evidence of Lawrence's decades of deception. Exhibit A, the hidden properties. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes purchased 6 rental properties between 2005 and 2018, Attorney Richardson explained. Total value, approximately $1.5 million. On 4 of these property purchases, Mr. Hayes listed himself as unmarried or single on closing documents. She displayed copies of the documents on a screen. There, clearly visible on official property records, Lawrence had checked boxes marked single and unmarried, despite being married to me for 43 years at the times of those purchases. Why would he lie about his marital status? Attorney Richardson asked rhetorically. Because he was deliberately concealing these purchases from his wife. He knew that if Mrs. Hayes was present at closings or listed on deeds, she'd discover his hidden investment empire. Exhibit B, the rental income. These 6 properties generated approximately $72,000 annually in rental income, Attorney Richardson continued. Over 15 years, that's $1.08 million. Where did that money go? She displayed bank statements. Into accounts in Mr. Hayes's name only. Accounts Mrs. Hayes never knew existed. Accounts that appear on tax returns they filed jointly, but which Mr. Hayes never discussed with his wife. Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes signed joint tax returns every year, Attorney Richardson emphasized. She trusted her husband to be honest about their finances. He violated that trust by hiding the existence of these income-generating properties and the bank accounts where the rental income was deposited. Exhibit C, the secret accounts. Beyond the rental properties, Mr. Hayes maintained investment accounts and bank accounts totaling approximately $800,000 that Mrs. Hayes had no knowledge of, Attorney Richardson said. She showed account statements. These accounts were funded through systematic diversion of Mr. Hayes's employment income. Based on the forensic accountant's analysis, Mr. Hayes diverted approximately 35% of his income into secret accounts over 30 years. Think about what that means, Your Honor, Attorney Richardson said. For 30 years, every time Mr. Hayes received a paycheck, he took a portion of that marital income and hid it from his wife. That's not wise investing. That's theft. Exhibit D, the children's accounts. Perhaps most troubling, Attorney Richardson continued, Mr. Hayes transferred $400,000 to accounts nominally owned by his adult children. These transfers occurred over the past 10 years, right around the time Mrs. Hayes started asking questions about their retirement planning. She displayed transfer records. The pattern is clear. Mrs. Hayes would ask about their financial security. Mr. Hayes would reassure her everything was fine. Then he'd transfer large sums to accounts in their children's names, accounts the children say they had limited or no access to. Why? Attorney Richardson asked. Because Mr. Hayes was preparing for this divorce. He was moving assets out of his name to hide them from the equitable distribution that would occur when he divorced his worthless wife. Lawrence took the stand to defend himself. Mr. Hayes, why did you list yourself as unmarried on property purchase documents? Attorney Richardson asked during cross-examination. That was a mistake, Lawrence claimed. I must have checked the wrong box. You made the same mistake on 4 separate property purchases over 13 years. Attorney Richardson pressed. I don't pay attention to those administrative details, Lawrence said weakly. Mr. Hayes, you worked in business for 45 years, Attorney Richardson said. Are you really claiming you don't pay attention to legal documents you sign? Lawrence had no good answer. Mr. Hayes, did you tell your wife about the 6 rental properties you owned? Attorney Richardson asked. She knew about our investments, Lawrence said vaguely. That's not what I asked, Attorney Richardson said firmly. Did you specifically tell your wife, I own 6 rental properties generating $72,000 annually? Not in those exact words, Lawrence admitted. In any words, Attorney Richardson pressed. She signed the tax returns, Lawrence said defensively. The properties were listed there. Were they clearly identified as rental properties? Attorney Richardson asked. They were listed as assets, Lawrence said. Mr. Hayes, yes or no? Did you explicitly tell your wife you owned 6 rental properties? Attorney Richardson demanded. No, Lawrence finally admitted. Why not? Attorney Richardson asked. Because it wasn't important for her to know the details, Lawrence said. I handled our finances. That was our arrangement. Your arrangement was that you would handle finances honestly, Attorney Richardson countered. Not that you would hide millions of dollars in assets from your wife. I didn't hide anything, Lawrence insisted. Everything was on our tax returns, which your wife signed without understanding what she was signing because she trusted you to be honest, Attorney Richardson interrupted. Mr. Hayes, you exploited your wife's trust to conceal assets. Isn't that true? No, I managed our finances responsibly, Lawrence started. By lying about your marital status on legal documents, Attorney Richardson challenged. By maintaining secret accounts your wife didn't know about, by transferring $400,000 to your children to hide it from your wife. Those transfers were gifts to my children, Lawrence claimed. Gifts they couldn't access, Attorney Richardson asked. Gifts they've now returned because they realized they were actually your hidden assets. Lawrence's face reddened. Mr. Hayes, you called your wife worthless and said she never contributed to your marriage, Attorney Richardson said. But the truth is, you systematically stole from her for 30 years, didn't you? I didn't steal anything, Lawrence shouted. I earned that money, it's mine. Money earned during a marriage belongs to both spouses, Attorney Richardson said calmly. But you didn't want to share it, so you hid it. And when your wife discovered the truth, you tried to convince her she had no right to assets you'd stolen from your partnership. Lawrence had no response. When I took the stand, Attorney Richardson asked me to tell my story. Mrs. Hayes, please describe your marriage to Lawrence Hayes, Attorney Richardson began. I took a deep breath. I met Lawrence when I was 17. We married when I was 19. For the first 15 years, we were partners. We both worked, we made decisions together, we built a life together. What changed? Attorney Richardson asked. Lawrence's career took off, I explained. He started earning significant income, and gradually he started seeing our marriage differently. He saw himself as the provider and me as, I don't know, someone who was along for the ride but not really contributing. How did that make you feel? Attorney Richardson asked. Invisible, I said. I was raising our 3 children. I was managing our household. I was supporting Lawrence's career by handling everything else so he could focus on work. But he didn't see that as valuable. When did you discover Lawrence had hidden assets? Attorney Richardson asked. About 10 years ago, I found documents in his office showing accounts and properties I didn't know about, I said. When I asked him about them, he said they were business investments and told me not to worry. I trusted him. Do you still trust him? Attorney Richardson asked. No, I said firmly. He betrayed my trust for 30 years. He stole from our marriage. He hid millions of dollars while telling me we needed to be careful with money. He made me feel guilty for spending money on basic necessities while he was secretly building a fortune I knew nothing about. What do you want from this divorce? Attorney Richardson asked. I want what's legally mine, I said. Half of everything we built during 50 years of marriage, not because I'm greedy, but because I earned it through 50 years of partnership, even if Lawrence doesn't see it that way. Floyd Turner made his closing argument first. Your Honor, my client admits he could have been more transparent about his investments, Floyd said. But that doesn't change the fundamental fact that he earned the money that funded those investments. Mrs. Hayes chose to be a homemaker. That was her choice. She shouldn't get half of assets she didn't earn. It was the same argument he'd made throughout the trial, and it was wrong. Attorney Richardson stood for her closing argument. Your Honor, Mr. Turner keeps saying Mrs. Hayes chose not to work, Attorney Richardson began. But that's not accurate. Mrs. Hayes did work. She worked as a full-time homemaker and mother for 50 years. The law recognizes that work has value. But beyond that, we need to remember what this case is really about, Attorney Richardson continued. This isn't a philosophical debate about whether homemaking counts as real work. This is about a husband who systematically defrauded his wife for 30 years. Mr. Hayes didn't just invest wisely, Attorney Richardson said, her voice rising. He lied on legal documents. He hid properties and accounts. He diverted marital income into secret investments. He transferred hundreds of thousands to his children to conceal assets. He committed what may constitute tax fraud. And when his wife discovered the truth, his response was to call her worthless and claim she deserved nothing, Attorney Richardson concluded. Your Honor, the law is clear. Marital assets should be divided equitably. But when one spouse deliberately conceals assets, courts can and should punish that behavior by awarding the other spouse a greater share. Mrs. Hayes isn't asking for charity, Attorney Richardson finished. She's asking for justice, and she deserves it. Judge Brooks took 2 weeks to review all the evidence and issue his ruling. When we returned to court for the verdict, I was terrified. What if the judge agreed with Lawrence that I didn't deserve half because I hadn't earned it? Judge Brooks began reading his decision. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony in this case, Judge Brooks said, and I'm troubled by what I've seen. My heart sank. That didn't sound good. Mr. Hayes, you systematically deceived your wife for at least 30 years. Judge Brooks continued, looking directly at Lawrence. You hid properties, accounts, and income. You lied on legal documents. You enlisted your children in asset concealment. You violated every principle of good faith and fair dealing that should exist in a marriage. Your argument that Mrs. Hayes doesn't deserve half the marital assets because she didn't earn income is legally and morally wrong, Judge Brooks said firmly. Marriage is a partnership. Mrs. Hayes's contributions as a homemaker and mother enabled your career success. Without her managing your household and raising your children, you couldn't have worked the hours necessary to build your career. Furthermore, you forfeited any right to equitable treatment when you chose to commit fraud, Judge Brooks continued. You didn't just earn and invest wisely. You stole from your wife by hiding marital assets. Therefore, I'm awarding Mrs. Hayes 60% of all marital assets, Judge Brooks announced. I gasped, 60%. I've been hopping for 50%. The marital estate totals approximately $4.76 million, Judge Brooks said. Mrs. Hayes will receive $2,856,000. Mr. Hayes will receive $1,904,000. Lawrence's face went pale. He tried to keep all $4.76 million. Instead, he was getting less than half. Additionally, I'm ordering Mr. Hayes to pay Mrs. Hayes's legal fees, which total $87,000, Judge Brooks added. And I'm ordering Mr. Hayes to pay spousal support of $6,000 per month for the rest of Mrs. Hayes's life. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the IRS for investigation of possible tax fraud, Judge Brooks concluded. Mr. Hayes, you're very lucky I'm not referring this for criminal prosecution. But if I discover you've hidden any additional assets, I won't hesitate to do so. This court is adjourned, Judge Brooks said, banging his gavel. After the ruling, Lawrence confronted me in the hallway outside the courtroom. Are you happy now? Lawrence demanded. You've destroyed me. I didn't destroy you, I said calmly. You destroyed yourself by lying and stealing for 30 years. That money was mine, Lawrence shouted. I earned it. No, it was ours, I corrected. Earned during our marriage, making it marital property. The judge explained this to you multiple times. You're taking 60%, Lawrence protested. That's not fair. The judge gave me 60% as punishment for your fraud, I explained. If you'd been honest from the start, we each would have gotten 50%. But you lied, you hid assets, you committed fraud. This is the consequence. I'll appeal, Lawrence threatened. You can try, I said, but the forensic accountant's report is very thorough, and the judge's ruling is based on clear evidence of your fraud. An appeals court isn't likely to overturn it. I'll make sure everyone knows what a greedy woman you are, Lawrence said. Everyone will know that a judge found you guilty of systematically defrauding your wife and awarded her extra assets as punishment, I countered. Tell that story if you want, Lawrence. See how sympathetic people are. Lawrence stormed off, and I stood there feeling something I hadn't felt in 50 years. Free. Over the next 3 months, the divorce was finalized. I received $2,856,000 in assets, our house plus cash and investments. $6,000 monthly spousal support for life. All of Lawrence's retirement from my legal fees, $87,000. Lawrence received $1,904,000 in assets, mostly his rental properties and remaining investments. Responsibility for any tax penalties from the IRS investigation. Our 3 children were divided in their reactions. Geneva called me crying. Mom, I'm so sorry. Dad convinced us you were being greedy, but when we saw the evidence in court, Dad lied to all of us for years. Curtis was angry. Mom, you destroyed Dad's finances. He had to sell properties to pay you. Curtis, those were marital properties he should have shared with me all along, I explained. I didn't destroy anything. I claimed what was legally mine. Viola refused to speak to me. You're dead to me, she said when I tried to call. You ruined Dad's life. It hurt that not all my children understood, but I'd learned an important lesson. I couldn't control how others perceived my choices. I could only make choices I could live with. And I could live with claiming what I'd earned through 50 years of partnership. Before I continue, kindly subscribe now, smash that like button, and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Is 60% fair or too much? Should Estelle reconcile with Viola? Where are you watching from? 3 years after my divorce from Lawrence was finalized, I sat on the porch of my beautiful new home, a cozy 3-bedroom house I'd purchased with my settlement money, and reflected on how completely I'd proven my ex-husband wrong. Lawrence had called me a worthless old woman who'd never contributed anything. But the court had ruled otherwise, and the past 3 years had shown just how wrong Lawrence had been about me. Let me show you how I proved him wrong forever. The first year after my divorce was both terrifying and exhilarating. At 70 years old, I suddenly had nearly $3 million in assets and complete control over my own finances for the first time in my adult life. I'd gone from having no financial autonomy to being a millionaire practically overnight. My first decision was hearing a financial advisor. Attorney Geneva Foster recommended a woman named Dr. Opal Chen, who specialized in working with divorced women rebuilding their lives. Mrs. Hayes, you have approximately $2.86 million in liquid assets, Dr. Chen said during our first meeting, plus $6,000 monthly spousal support. That's a very strong financial position. I've never managed money before, I admitted nervously. Lawrence always handled everything. Then let's start with education, Dr. Chen said kindly. I'm going to teach you how money works, how to invest, how to protect your assets. By the end of this year, you'll be financially literate and confident. Dr. Chen was true to her word. Over the next year, she taught me how to read investment portfolios, how to understand tax implications, how to budget and plan for long-term financial security, how to protect assets through proper estate planning. Dr. Chen, I wish I'd learned this 40 years ago, I said during one session. You're learning it now, Dr. Chen said. That's what matters. And Mrs. Hayes, at 70, you potentially have 20 or 30 more years of life. You're building security for your future, not just managing the present. With Dr. Chen's guidance, I made strategic decisions about my settlement money. Real estate. I purchased a beautiful 3-bedroom house for $420,000 in cash. No mortgage, completely mine. Why such a large house for just you? Dr. Chen asked. Because I want guest rooms for my grandchildren, I explained, and a home office, and space for hobbies I never had time for when I was managing Lawrence's household. Investment portfolio. I invested $1.8 million in a diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and index funds designed to generate income while preserving capital. This portfolio should generate approximately $72,000 annually in dividends and interest, Dr. Chen explained. Combined with your $72,000 annual spousal support, you'll have $144,000 in annual income without touching your principal. Emergency fund. I kept $300,000 in liquid savings as an emergency fund. Charity fund. I designated $200,000 for charitable giving over time to causes supporting domestic violence victims and financial literacy for women. Personal spending. I kept $140,000 for immediate personal use, travel, hobbies, gifts for my grandchildren, and simply enjoying life. At 70 years old, I'd gone from having no financial control to being financially secure for the rest of my life. Lawrence always told me I was bad with money, I mentioned to Dr. Chen, that I didn't understand finances. Mrs. Hayes, you've made excellent financial decisions this year, Dr. Chen said. You've created a balanced portfolio, secured housing, built emergency reserves, and planned for both giving and enjoyment. You're not bad with money. You were just never given the opportunity to learn. In my second year after divorce, I discovered something unexpected: purpose. For 50 years, my purpose had been supporting Lawrence and raising our children. When the marriage ended and the children were grown, I'd lost my sense of purpose. But then I met Viola Martinez, a woman running a nonprofit called Financial Freedom for Women. "Mrs. Hayes, I heard about your divorce case," Viola said when she reached out. "The judge's ruling that homemaking is valuable work, that financial deception in marriage is fraud. It made news in the legal community. Would you be willing to share your story?" "Share my story how?" I asked. "We help women going through divorce understand their rights," Viola explained. "Many women, especially older women, believe they're not entitled to marital assets because they didn't earn income. Your story proves that's wrong." "I don't know," I said hesitantly. "It's very personal." "I understand," Viola said. "But Mrs. Hayes, there are thousands of women in your exact situation, married for decades to men who control all the finances, who hide assets, who claim their wives don't deserve anything because they didn't work. Your story could help them." I thought about it for a week, then I called Viola back. "I'll do it," I decided. If my story can help other women, then something good came from 50 years of being undervalued. I started speaking at women's groups, churches, senior centers, anywhere that would have me. I'd tell my story. 50 years of marriage, being called worthless, discovering hidden assets, fighting for my rights, and ultimately winning. The response was overwhelming. After every talk, women would approach me with their own stories. "My husband controls all our money and won't tell me how much we have. I've been married for 40 years, and my husband says I don't deserve half if we divorce because I didn't work. I found documents showing my husband has accounts I didn't know about. I want to leave, but I have no money of my own and I'm scared." I'd give them Attorney Richardson's contact information, Dr. Chen's name, resources for financial literacy and legal aid. "You're not worthless," I'd tell each woman. "You worked for your marriage, you earned your share, don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Some women took action. Some didn't. Fear is powerful, especially when you've been controlled for decades. But at least they knew they had options. 18 months after my divorce, a literary agent named Curtis Stone approached me. "Mrs. Hayes, I think your story would make a powerful book," Curtis said. "A memoir about financial abuse in marriage, fighting back, and rebuilding your life." "I'm not a writer," I protested. "You don't have to be," Curtis said. "We'd pair you with a ghostwriter. You'd tell your story, they'd write it, and you'd approve the final manuscript." "Why would anyone want to read about my divorce?" I asked. "Because millions of women are in similar situations," Curtis explained. "And millions more need to understand that homemaking has value, that financial deception is abuse, and that it's never too late to fight for what you deserve." 6 months later, my book, Worthless: How I Proved My Husband Wrong and Reclaimed My Life, was published. I never expected it to sell well. It was just my story. But the book struck a chord. Within 3 months, it had sold 150,000 copies. Within a year, 400,000. Women wrote to me by the thousands. "Your book gave me the courage to check our financial records. I found hidden accounts. I'm filing for divorce. I've been married for 30 years believing I was worthless. Your story showed me I'm not." "My husband called me a freeloader for being a stay-at-home mom. I showed him your court case. He shut up real fast. The book earned me approximately $800,000 in royalties over 3 years. Money I donated entirely to women's shelters and financial literacy programs. "I don't need the money," I told Curtis. "Dr. Chen set me up with more than enough to live on, but other women need help escaping financial abuse. That's where this money should go." Lawrence was reportedly furious about the book, but he couldn't do anything about it. Everything in the book was true and documented in public court records. 3 years after my divorce, I was a completely different person from the woman Lawrence had called worthless. I own my home outright, $420, 000 paid in cash. I had $2.1 million in investments, generating $75,000 annually. I received $72,000 annually in spousal support. I'd earned $800,000 in book royalties, all donated to charity. I spoke regularly at events about women's financial rights. I'd helped dozens of women find the courage to claim their financial rights in divorce. I had purpose, financial security, and peace. At 72 years old, I'd never been happier or more fulfilled. 3 years after the divorce, Lawrence reached out through his lawyer requesting a meeting. Absolutely not, I told Attorney Richardson when she called to tell me. I have no interest in seeing Lawrence. He says he wants to apologize, Attorney Richardson said. He had 50 years to apologize, I said. He chose to call me worthless instead. I don't need his apology now. What should I tell his lawyer? Attorney Richardson asked. Tell him I'm doing wonderfully, I said. Tell him I own a beautiful home, have complete financial security, published a best-selling book, and found purpose helping other women. Tell him I proved him completely wrong about everything. And tell him I never want to hear from him again. Attorney Richardson laughed. I'll phrase it more professionally, but yes, I'll convey that message. My relationship with my children remained complicated. Geneva and I had rebuilt our relationship. She apologized repeatedly for initially siding with Lawrence. Mom, I'm so sorry, Geneva said during one of our weekly coffee dates. Dad spent my whole life telling me you didn't contribute financially, so when the divorce happened, I believed him. But seeing the evidence in court, understanding what he'd done, I was wrong. You were an amazing mother and a full partner in that marriage. Thank you for saying that, I said, tears forming. It means everything. Curtis remained distant. He spoke to me occasionally, but made it clear he thought I'd been too harsh on Lawrence. Dad lost over half his assets because of you, Curtis said during one tense conversation. Dad lost assets he'd tried to hide from me, I corrected. He would have kept half if he'd been honest. He lost more because he committed fraud. You didn't have to take him to court, Curtis insisted. Actually, I did, I said, because working it out privately would have meant accepting whatever crumbs Lawrence chose to give me. I deserved half. The court agreed. I'm sorry you can't see that. Viola still refused to speak to me. She'd completely sided with Lawrence and considered me the villain in this story. It hurt, but I'd learned I couldn't control my children's perceptions. I could only live my truth. The bright spot was my grandchildren. Geneva's 3 children, ages 15, 13, and 11, had started spending weekends with me. Grandma, this house is amazing, my 15-year-old grandson Marcus said the first time they visited. It's so much nicer than Grandpa's apartment. Grandpa has an apartment, I asked, surprised. Yeah, he had to sell his big house and move to a 2-bedroom apartment, my 13-year-old granddaughter Estelle, named after me, said. He says it's because you took all his money. That's not what happened, I explained gently. Grandpa and I got divorced. The court divided our assets fairly. Grandpa had to sell some properties to give me my share, but he still has nearly $2 million. He's not poor. He sure acts like he is, 11-year-old Theodore said. He's always complaining about money now. Your grandfather is adjusting to having less than he's used to, I said diplomatically, but he's still financially comfortable. Over time, I built wonderful relationships with Geneva's children. They'd spend weekends with me, and I'd teach them things Lawrence never taught our children. Financial literacy, budgeting, investing, the importance of financial independence. Grandma, why didn't Grandpa want you to have half the money? Estelle asked me one day. Because Grandpa didn't value the work I did managing our home and raising your mother and uncles, I explained. He thought only work that earns money has value, but the court disagreed. The court said my work had value even though it didn't generate income. I think what you did was valuable, Estelle said seriously. Raising kids is hard work. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, hugging her. Remember that when you grow up. Your worth isn't defined by your paycheck. It's defined by your character, your contributions, and your value as a human being. 2 years after the divorce, the IRS investigation Judge Brooks had ordered concluded. Lawrence was found to have underreported income and evaded approximately $340,000 in taxes over 20 years. He was ordered to pay the $340,000 in back taxes, plus penalties and interest totaling another $180,000. Lawrence is furious, Attorney Richardson told me when she called with the news. His lawyer tried to argue that the underreporting was accidental, but the IRS found it was systematic and deliberate. So he owes over $500,000 to the IRS? I asked. Yes, Attorney Richardson confirmed. Between the divorce settlement, legal fees, and now the IRS penalties, Lawrence's $4.76 million has been reduced to approximately $1.3 million. Part of me felt bad for him, but a larger part felt this was justice. Lawrence had spent decades lying, hiding money, and cheating the system. Now the system was holding him accountable. Through Geneva, I learned that Lawrence was struggling. Mom, Dad is really bitter, Geneva told me. He had to sell 4 of his 6 rental properties to pay you and the IRS. He's living in a small apartment. He's constantly complaining about money even though he still has over $1 million. $1 million is more than most people have, I pointed out. I know, Geneva said, but Dad's used to being wealthy. Now he's just comfortable and he hates it. That's a consequence of his choices, I said. He chose to hide assets. He chose to evade taxes. He chose to call me worthless and demand a divorce. Those choices had consequences. He asks about you sometimes, Geneva said. What does he ask? I said, curious despite myself. He asks if you're struggling financially, Geneva said. I think he expects you to be destitute or something. When I tell him you're doing great, that you have a beautiful house, financial security, published a book, he gets really angry. Because it destroys his narrative, I said. Lawrence convinced himself I was worthless, that I couldn't survive without him. But I'm thriving. That proves he was wrong about everything. He also asks if you've remarried, Geneva said. What do you tell him? I asked. That you're happily single and have no interest in remarrying, Geneva said. Which makes him even angrier. I think he expected you to be desperate and alone. Instead, I'm independent and fulfilled, I said. Good. He should see what I'm capable of when I'm not being controlled and diminished. 3 years after Lawrence called me a worthless old woman, I organized a charity event to raise money for women escaping financial abuse. The event raised $480,000, partly from my book royalties, partly from donations, partly from ticket sales to hear me speak. At the event, I stood before 300 people and told my story one more time. 3 years ago, my husband of 50 years told me I was worthless, I began. He said I'd never contributed anything to our marriage. He said I was dead weight he'd been carrying for 50 years. The next morning, I proved him wrong, I continued. I discovered he'd hidden $3.5 million in assets. I hired a lawyer, I fought for my rights, and I won. The court awarded me 60% of our marital assets, $86 million, as punishment for his fraud, I said. The court ruled that my 50 years of homemaking, child-rearing, and household management had value, legal value, financial value, real value. But more than the money, I proved something else, I concluded. I proved that I wasn't worthless, that I never had been, that my worth wasn't defined by my paycheck but by my character, my contributions, and my resilience. In the 3 years since my divorce, I've built a beautiful life, I said. I own my home, I have financial security, I've published a book, I've helped other women claim their rights, I've found purpose and peace. My ex-husband tried to make me believe I was nothing without him, I finished. Instead, I've proven I'm everything I always was, strong, capable, valuable, and that I'm better off without him. The audience gave me a standing ovation. After the event, dozens of women came up to thank me. You gave me courage to leave my financially abusive marriage. Your story helped me understand my worth. I bought your book for my daughter, so she'll never let anyone devalue her. This was how I proved Lawrence wrong forever. Not just by winning in court, not just by securing financial assets, but by building a life of purpose, meaning, and value that demonstrated everything he'd said about me was a lie. Now, at 72 years old, I wake up every morning in my beautiful home that I own outright. I make coffee in my kitchen, where no one criticizes how I brew it or when I make it. I check my investment portfolio, managed according to my values and goals. I plan my day, filled with activities I choose because they bring me joy or purpose. I live on my terms, independently, confidently, successfully. Lawrence was wrong about everything. I wasn't worthless, I was priceless. I didn't fail to contribute. I contributed immeasurably for 50 years, contributions the law recognized even when Lawrence didn't. I wasn't dead weight. I was the foundation that made his success possible. And when he tried to steal from me and discard me, I fought back and won. 3 years ago, Lawrence called me a worthless old woman. The next morning, I began proving him wrong. And every day since, I've continued proving him wrong. By living well, by building security, by finding purpose, by helping others, by refusing to be diminished. Lawrence is 74 now, living in a small apartment, bitter about the consequences of his own choices. I'm 72, living in a beautiful home I purchased with assets I fought for and won, surrounded by grandchildren who know their grandmother's worth, helping women all over the country understand their value. My husband called me worthless, but I proved him wrong forever. Not with words, with actions, with results, with a life built on my own terms after 50 years of being controlled. And that's the greatest proof of all. 3 years after the divorce, Estelle is thriving. Purchased a $420K home in cash. Has $2.1 million in investments generating $75K year. Receives $72K year spousal support. Published best-selling book, Worthless, that sold 400,000 copies. Earned $800K in royalties, all donated to charity. Became advocate speaking at events about women's financial rights. Helped dozens of women escape financial abuse. Raised $480K at charity event. Meanwhile, Lawrence had to sell 4 rental properties to pay Estelle and the IRS. IRS found he evaded $340K in taxes over 20 years, ordered to pay $520K total. Lawrence's $4.76 million reduced to $1.3 million. Lives in small apartment, constantly bitter. Asked Geneva if Estelle is struggling, shocked to learn she's thriving. Geneva reconciled with Estelle, apologized for siding with Lawrence. Curtis still distant. Viola refuses contact. But Estelle rebuilt relationship with grandchildren, teaches them financial literacy. At 72, Estelle owns her home, has complete financial security, published book, helps other women, found purpose and peace. Lawrence at 74 is bitter in small apartment. Estelle proved him wrong forever, not just with court victory, but by building extraordinary life on her own terms. This story proves that homemaking has legal and financial value. Hidden assets in marriage are fraud. Courts punish financial deception with larger awards. It's never too late to fight for what you deserve. Your worth isn't defined by paychecks. Financial independence brings peace. The best revenge is living well. You can rebuild at any age. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories. Smash that like button. Turn on notifications for new content. Drop a comment. What part of Estelle's transformation inspired you most? Should more women fight for their financial rights in divorce? Where are you watching from? United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Jamaica, South Africa, Australia, Trinidad, India, Philippines? Let me know. Remember, if your spouse controls all finances, hides assets, or devalues your contributions, document everything. Hire a lawyer, fight for your rights. Homemaking is real work. You deserve half of marital assets regardless of who earned them. Courts recognize the value of non-income contributions. Don't let anyone call you worthless. Prove them wrong by claiming what's legally yours. Estelle's husband called her worthless, said she, never contributed anything. Demanded divorce expecting to keep everything. The next morning, she discovered $3.5 million in hidden assets. Fought in court. Won 60%, $2.86 million, as punishment for his fraud. 3 years later, she's thriving in a beautiful home, helping other women, published best-selling book. Lawrence lost over half his wealth to divorce settlement and IRS penalties, lives bitter in small apartment. Estelle proved HIM wrong forever. Thank you for following this powerful journey from worthless wife to financially independent advocate, from controlled victim to empowered survivor, from dismissed homemaker to best-selling author changing lives. Until the next story, stay strong, know your worth, and remember that it's never too late to fight for what you deserve.